Yeah, man, I'll tell you what, that dang old internet, man, you just go on there and point and click it and then talk about www. Call me, you got that. For some reason or another, you sounded a little taller on radio.
Well, for my money, he's got all the facial characteristics of a criminal.
Now, here's your host, that gravy sopping, crappie flopping, stump jumping, Bible thumping, gun toting, mater growing son of a gun, the backwoods Baptist himself, Pastor Harold Smith.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Troy McGahan, for that brief but accurate introduction. I am the Backwoods Baptist. I am Harold Smith, and you are on the Backwoods Baptist podcast today. You say, what is a Backwoods Baptist? Well, they're a little more common than you think. You too might be a Backwoods Baptist if every potluck at your church is also doubles as a wild game dinner. It seems to be that way where I've gone to church growing up. Deer meat was always on the table. I'm sitting here on a cold day in my office looking out at the bird feeders, and they are loaded up. The cardinals are fighting off all the other birds, and the sparrows are eating there too. And I'm reminded of the text where the Bible tells us that God feeds the sparrows, and that demonstrates the sovereignty of God. But I am feeding the sparrows, and that demonstrates the responsibility of humanity. So divine sovereignty, human responsibility, going hand in hand. God laid it upon my heart to put out feed for birds, and in turn, God feeds the birds. That's how it works, friend. There's you a sermon in a simple setting. God uses us to bring about his purposes on the earth. Now, if you're listening to this podcast when it comes out or nearby, we are in between Christmas and New Year. So we're staring the year 2023 right in the face. We're looking at that new year, and a lot of people are going to start making resolutions. And man, I have made a bunch of them in my life, and I don't really know that I've ever kept any of them. I mean, I've made a good effort, and it was usually the read the Bible through in a year. That was usually my resolution. I've never read the Bible through in a year, and I'm still saved, and I still have the hope of heaven before me, but I've never read the Bible through in a year. And I don't consider myself a heathen, but I've never read the Bible through in a year. Now, have I read the Bible through? Yes. I've read every book of the Bible, most of them multiple times. I'm just a slow reader. I can't keep that pace up. I'm unable to do so. And so I'm unashamedly not a Bible read through in a year. But as I look at the new year, my plan is not to read the Bible through in a year, but I do plan to read it every day. My prayer is not so much a resolution as much as it is a desire, much as something I think God has put upon my heart. And what I want to see in the year 2023 is a revival of generosity, a revival of generosity. And here's what I've noticed. I've come to the conclusion that we are not nearly as generous as our forefathers were. We lack generosity. Now, one thing that has cropped up in our day is the panhandlers. I never saw anybody up until about 3, 4, 5 years ago, maybe. I never saw anybody sitting at the exit ramp of the interstate holding a sign up saying anything helps, God bless you, looking for work, looking for food, hungry, just need gas. And one guy said, not going to lie, just want beer money. And the panhandlers are everywhere. And it just ceases to amaze me that people will pull up next to someone they don't know, believe a story that has no credibility from a person that's a known liar, and give them $20 and feel like they've been generous and they've been good and they're in the Christmas spirit. Friend, I'm talking about a revival of real generosity, not giving the panhandlers a 10 or even a 20. I'm not talking about tipping your waitress an extra couple bucks. I'm not talking about putting 50 cents in the red kettle at Christmas. I'm talking about real generosity. I'm not talking about tips and one-offs. I'm talking about a generosity that identifies us as a person. In other words, I'm talking about something that makes God's people recognized as generous people. And right now, Christianity is in a mess. We do not look like a generous people. There are a lot of people parading around as Christians, and we say they're not, but sadly, real Christians don't look any different than fake Christians because we have no real generosity. So what I'm praying for in 2023 is a revival of generosity. Now, what does real generosity look like? And let me just give out this disclaimer. I'm not looking for any of your money. I just want you to be generous. And you don't have to have money to be generous. You can be generous in 3 ways: with your time, your talents, and your treasure. You can be generous with these 3 things, and I would encourage you to be generous with all 3. Not just one at the expense of the other, but to be generous with your time, your talents, and your treasure. And yes, I did alliterate because I am a Baptist. And Baptists alliterate. I think the Apostle Paul did too, but I don't have hard and fast proof of that. But if he was a Baptist, he probably did. So what does it look like to be generous with our time? I would say being generous with your time is giving people access to you. We need to make ourselves accessible to others. I remember a few times in my life where I've been able to have one-on-one time with a fairly important person. I'll give you an example that I'll name drop here, okay? At one time in my life, I sat one-on-one in Phil Johnson's office at the Grace to You headquarters. And we had a discussion about some things that both of us were passionate about. And I was able to talk to him one-on-one. And he's probably spent, 30 minutes with me. For a guy that's the director of Grace to You, who's editing books, who's operating a ministry, who's an elder in a church and a Sunday school teacher and a traveling preacher, for Phil Johnson to give me 30 minutes of his time, I felt that was very generous of his time. Friend, that kind of generosity ought to apply to all of us. We shouldn't just give our time to those that we deem worthy of our time. We should be available to even the least among us. And the easiest way to do this is to answer your phone. I said it, answer your phone. I know this is going to shock the world. If Christians started answering their phones, they would say, man, them Christians are wild, man. They're crazy. They answer their phone when you call. Now, look, if it says unknown number or from some 12 states away and you don't know anybody there, it's probably a telemarketer. But many times we will pick up our phone, look at it and go, oh, I don't want to talk to them. And we turn it over and turn it off. I'm asking you in 2023 to be generous with your time. I'm asking you to be accessible to others. I'm asking you to be willing to meet and to sit down and to spend your lunch not alone in solitude, but maybe you spend your lunch with someone that needs counsel. Maybe you spend your evening with your spouse. Maybe you set aside a time in the week where you're regularly with your children. Maybe that's where your generosity is lacking, in your own family. But I would venture to say most of us have regular times with our family, and the generosity that's lacking is with fellow church members when we just don't have time for them, or I'll talk to them later, or maybe it's with neighbors that we know are lost and we just don't take the time to evangelize them in an intentional way. So in 2023, I'm praying that the church would be generous. And when I say church, I don't mean the institution. I mean the individuals that make up the institution. I pray that they would be generous with their time and be accessible to their believers, their fellow believers in Christ, accessible to the lost and accessible to their family. And I'm praying that they would realize that there are things more important than just bass fishing and deer hunting. Make time for others and be generous with your time. Number 2, be generous with your talents. And by this, I mean your availability. Your talents are things that God has uniquely gifted you to do. This could be any number of things. God could gift you to sing. You may have the voice of an angel. Boy, I sure didn't get that. I didn't get a radio voice. I just got the face for radio. I never got the voice for it. But some of you have the ability to sing, and you just simply won't share that ability. You won't take time to practice, to prepare, and to get up and sing and minister to others. Some of you are gifted carpenters, and you don't share those talents at the church. Some of you are gifted in lawn care, and you don't share those talents at church. Some of you are landscapers and decorators and all of these things, but you don't have the availability to share and to serve others in the church with your talents. This is the sad thing to me. Churches pay to have their lawn done, and when you go by there on a Sunday morning, there's 12 people who work for lawn care companies that could be generous with their talents. There are people in the church that have a green thumb and can plant flowers, and they're paying some company to come out and put mums in the flower bed for fall. I mean, the reason churches hire things done is because there's a shortage of people in the church with the talents to do so. And I know what you're saying. Well, I'm just not good at anything, Brother Harold. I just don't have any talents. I bet you can be taught to clean a toilet, and I bet your church probably pays somebody to clean the toilet. It's time. It's taking your energies. It's being available. I'm praying that the church of the Lord Jesus Christ in 2023 would see a revival of generosity and realize that God has gifted them to certain tasks that they have a unique ability to do well, and that they would spend that talent not just serving themselves, but serving the local church that they're a part of. This is what I want to see happen. This kind of availability is what's needed. This service to others. You know, Paul describes the church as a physical body, hands and feet and mouth and ears, and nose. And not everybody can be the eyeballs. And a lot of people want to be the mouth. Nobody seems to want to be the ears. And what Paul is saying is that we all have these individual talents. And what I see in Christian churches today are a lot of people who have gifts, and they're not making those gifts available to the church. They're just using them on themselves. You go into their home is nicely decorated, and the church flowers in front of the pulpit look hideous. And I know nothing about flowers, but I can spot bad ones when I see them. The point I'm making is people are good at that. Maybe you don't have a lot of money. Maybe you can be generous with your talents and say, you know what? Our church is lacking in this area, and I'm good at that. I'm going to devote some of my energy to patching this up. Now, look, don't go around being the Lone Ranger. Talk to your pastor about this. Make sure you're not causing any problems, but be generous with your availability in 2023. Serve others in the church. Lastly, talking about being generous with your time, your talents, your treasure. I have also subliterated this: access, availability, and allowance. How can I be generous with my treasure, with my money, with my income, with my substance? I've heard people say, especially rich older people, well, we're just living on Social Security. That's all we have coming in. No, it's not. You're sitting on $2.8 million, and you have interest off that that's compounding every year. Being generous with your treasure means making allowance out of what you have. It's not just helping with what you have coming in. It's helping with what you've put back for the time in which you're at. I used to do swimming pool work, and I had an older gentleman, and he had been very successful in business. And every time something would break on his pool, he'd give you this big sob speech like, well, I'm just up here living on a fixed income. Yeah, but you're also driving an $80,000 car. If you're living on a fixed income and driving an $80,000 car, you're about to spend $800 on a new pool pump. But they would use this as an excuse not to spend money or to chew you down on the price. So when we look at allowance, you need to set aside a portion of your income and your wealth to go above and beyond and be generous with. Now, what does that look like? Well, I would go above the tithe. A tithe is 10%. Oh, hey, we're here. Let's just hash it out. I don't mind telling you. I think everybody ought to tithe for starters. I think that ought to be the starting point. Well, tithing's not mentioned in the New Testament. That went away with the law of Moses. Abraham was tithing before Moses was ever thought of. The tithe was a natural starting point, 10%. Now, I'm not going to sit here and beat you up if you only give 8%, but if you don't have a percentage in mind, you're squandering your money. If you don't have a set portion in mind, if you don't have a dollar figure that's set, then you're just giving God what's left over that you don't have any good use for. And if you got money laying around, you'll find a better use than being generous with it and giving it to the church, to the Lord's work. So consider in 2023 giving your church more than 10%. If you're not at 10%, consider getting to 10%. Consider giving to missions above and beyond what you give to the local church. So maybe you are giving 10% or 20% or who knows what. Pray about being generous to some particular missionary or mission cause. Maybe there's a person that the Lord's laid on your heart. Send him some money on top of that, or send that ministry some money on top of that. Consider just random acts of kindness. I've tried to make this the hallmark of my life. I've tried, and I've not done it well, but I've tried to buy meals. I've tried to pick up the tab every time I possibly can. I've tried to give gifts out. I've tried to be generous with gifts. I've tried to be generous with meals. In other words, I try to pay and pick up the tab anytime I'm eating with someone else. And I try to surprise people with gifts, just out of the blue gifts. And I don't mean big lavish gifts. It could be as simple as, we made brownies. Let's box up half of these and give them to the neighbor. And those brownies didn't cost us much of anything, but it meant the world to the neighbor. These random acts of kindness will spur generosity in others, but you have to set aside a portion of your income that you're going to do this with. And by doing this and by making allowance in your income that you're going to spend this on somebody else this month, or maybe it's this week, however you get paid, maybe it's this year, set aside an amount of money that you're going to give to the church above what you did last year, that you're going to give to missions above what you did last year, that you're going to spend on other people above what you did last year. That kind of generosity is what I want to see revived in the church today. And I think it will have a great impact if Christians will just return to being as generous as our forefathers were. Now, what are the hindrances? That would be the thing to describe here. What are the hindrances to being generous with our time, our talents, and our treasure? And I think the real hindrance with our time is what is commonly called the American dream. I think that we have this idea in our mind that we ought to be out working all these hours, doing all this thing, growing our job, growing our business, climbing the corporate ladder, maximizing and expanding our realm of influence, building a bigger home, driving a better car, getting the kids into a nicer college. And we literally work ourselves to death in the American dream. And so when the phone does ring, we're tired of talking on the phone. I've been on the phone all day. I'm not answering that. When someone does want to meet, no, I don't have time for that. I've been in meetings all day. When it's time to go to church on Wednesday night, we say, well, every Wednesday night this week, I've had to work. I'm not going down there on Wednesday night. I'll go on Sunday morning. This is called the American dream. We think that by gaining all this stuff and by devoting our time and our energies and wearing ourselves out, and we work hard and we play hard. And that work hard, play hard mentality leaves no time to worship and serve others the way that we should. The hindrance to time is what I'm calling the American dream. What's the hindrance to our talents? I would say it's non-church commitments, good things that are not the best thing. I'll give you an example of this. I know people who coach little league ball, and they will live their life in a ball field in the fall and in the spring and summer of the year. And they will give hours and hours and hours of their time to training little kids to hit a ball, to kick a ball, to catch a ball. And when you ask them to help at church, they don't have the ability. I'm like, you're good with kids. I know you are. I know, but I got too much stuff on my plate. Maybe it's not the ball field, and I don't want to just lump everybody into one category. It could be any number of things that people get too committed with. These are not bad things. Maybe it's other charities. Maybe you're too busy with your other charity to be actively involved in the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's really easy to get busy doing things that are good, and so busy that we can't do the things that are best. I know a lot of people who volunteer at the food bank. I know people who volunteer their abilities to help others, and they work with the poor and the down and out. But the church also needs some of those talents as well. So if you have gifts, use them at the church. Nothing wrong with the other things, but don't do it at the expense of your brothers and sisters in Christ. Now, here's the big one. Most people will say they don't have a lot of money. And so we'll say, be generous with your time, be generous with their talents, because you don't have a lot of money. Well, in reality, you do have a lot of money. In reality, if you work 40 hours in this country, you're overloaded with money. The difference is you have the mindset that everything that you work for needs to be spent. So the hindrance to sharing your treasure and having money available to buy meals and gifts and give to the church and support missionaries on your own is that you're too far in debt. I've had people ask me, how do you afford to buy 15 people's meal at a lunch? Well, I didn't say it, but I wanted to say, my wife doesn't drive an $80,000 SUV. I don't drive a $60,000 pickup. We don't live in a $500,000 home. We made decisions about debt years ago that allow us, even though we don't make a lot of money, even though we don't have a lot of income, the income that we do have is not already committed to a monthly bill. So there's two ways to have accessible income: make more. And usually when you make more, that takes time and talents away from the congregation and invest it in a job, or spend less. And if we will spend less, we will have more to give. And that is the missing link in our generosity with our finances. Not only is it debt, it's decisions. I've did some financial counseling over the years with various people, and I'll say, just bring me, your income. Just give me a dollar figure. What do you have to deal with here? And they tell me, this is how much we make. I said, okay, how much is your house payment? How much is your car payment? We go through all those things. There's a whole ton of money left. I'm like, where's all this money going? Oh, well, I smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. Well, we eat out 5 nights a week, and we play the lottery. And these are all decisions that you're making. And you're choosing to spend this money on those things as opposed to being generous and sharing it with those in the ministry, sharing it with the church, sharing it to spread the gospel around the world. What I'm saying is, let me just challenge someone. I dipped Copenhagen snuff for 25 years. Just quit dipping snuff. You can do it. Our God's bigger than He closes the mouth of lions. He parts the Red Sea. He tells the sea to be still. He walks on water. He can knock the Copenhagen out of your hand. He can get you off the spit cup. You can do it. I don't know what a can of Copenhagen goes for. Let's say $8. Take that $8 you're spending every day. My stars, $8 a day, 7 days, $56 a week. You can be all kinds of generous if you could quit putting tobacco in your lip. Make good decisions. Get out of debt. Be generous in 2023. Now, why am I making such a big deal out of this? Here's why. How much different would our churches look if they were well attended? I'm talking about the Sunday morning crowd was the same crowd on Wednesday night. I'm talking about Sunday school and Sunday morning worship service being roughly the same size. That's drastically different than most churches. The reason being is most people say they don't have time for Sunday school and they're too busy to go on the midweek Bible study. But if we're generous with our time and we know that we have a commitment to serve others, then here's what happens. We invest our time in the congregation of the church, and our churches look different because they're well attended. They're also well served. There's not constantly sign-up sheets to work in the nursery, to clean the flower bed, to go visiting, to do all these things, because people are volunteering for them already because they're generous with their talents. Here's one. They're well funded. If churches had the funds to properly pay their pastors, we wouldn't have pastors working part-time jobs to make ends meet. I know that's necessary at times. I've done it in my own ministry a couple of times. But many times it's not that we don't have enough people to fully fund a church. It's that the people are not giving as they should. And if a church was generous, they would be well funded, and we would have more missionaries that are better funded. We'd be able to buy more literature, reach more people, send out more Bibles, do all sorts of things if our churches were generous. Drastically different from the world. The world would look at the church and say, that's a real church. That's not a fake one. Those people put their money where their mouth is, and they put their mouth in the church. They're there all the time. They're regularly attending. They're working there. A church that looks drastically different from the world is a church that will reach the world. And by the way, that is how you reach the world. You reach them not by becoming like them, but by being drastically different from them. So will you join me in 2023 in praying for generosity? And will you join me in 2023 by being generous with your time, your talents, and your treasure? Friend, I'm asking you, pray and ask God to help you. Pray that he'll grant you the ability. Look at the decisions you're making. Look at the debt that you have. Do you really need a new boat? Do you really need an $80,000 vehicle? Do you really need a summer home? Do you really need your third vacation to the Bahamas? Or could you be generous with this time? Could you, instead of taking a vacation, take a mission trip? These are things that I would urge you to pray about. These are things that I'm praying about. These are things that I'm striving to do myself. Thank you all for listening today. I've got a busy January coming up. If you are anywhere in the area of these places, I would encourage you to come. I'll be preaching at Maranatha Baptist Church on January the 15th in Nashville, Arkansas for Pastor Bruce Short. I'll be preaching in a revival meeting at First Baptist Bloomer for Michael Sanchez. I'll be preaching a couple nights of a 5-day revival. Also, Michael will be preaching and evangelist Randy Bain. That's January the 22nd through the 26th. If you're in Western Arkansas, I would love to see you. The 27th and 28th, that's a Friday, Saturday. There will be a conference at First Baptist Plummerville, Arkansas. That's Central Arkansas, just outside of Conway, between Conway and Morrilton, right on I-40. This is a great conference with 4 different preachers. It would be encouragement if you were able to attend that. And then lastly, on January the 29th, I'll be preaching at Beryl Baptist Church in Valonia, Arkansas. If you're in those areas, you do not have a church home, I would love to see you. I would love to introduce you to these churches, these pastors, help you find a church home in that area. If you're free on a weeknight, you ought to come to one of the meetings either in Bloomer or Plummerville. If you can't come to those, pray for a revival. Pray that the people of God would look like the people of God, would be generous with their stuff, that the world would say those people are different. Thank you for listening today, and I will see you guys on the next podcast.
Are you the big chief or one of the little Indians?
What the heck are you guys doing? Trying to ruin my life and make me look like a friggin' idiot?
What we're dealing with here is a complete lack of respect for the law.
Don't get me serious, Duke boy. I'm feeling kisky.
You on to bed now, like I told you to. We got work tomorrow.